The temple did not use the water from the Gihon spring. They don't understand Jerusalem. They don't understand the archaeology of the city. And they're going after fables that sound good to people, but they're not based on fact at all. The bottom line is it's anti-Semitic. It's saying, no, the Jews are wrong. We're right.
Welcome to the Temple Mount Report, the show dedicated to the holiest place on earth. Today I have a very special guest with me. Doron ran into him on the Temple Mount. He asked if he could come and sit down and share his wealth of knowledge with us. Joseph Good, thank you so much for joining us on the Temple Mount Report.
Thank you so much for having me here, and I'm very excited to see the work that you're doing. And I believe that we're in a time that is a time of God, a time of Hashem. It's a time where it's been prophesied for 2,000 years, 3,000, 4,000, going back to the beginning, that the temple would be destroyed, but the temple would be rebuilt. And all of these things are coming together. Since 67, there's been milestones along the way. At this point, since about 2013, there's been this great awakening in the non-Jewish world. For me, I've been doing temple seminars for most of my life as a believer. From the very beginning, this is something that God called me into. First week.
How long ago was that?
It was about 30 years, 87, somewhere 31 years ago, okay? The first week I became a believer. And I had a man come to me. I was reading my Bible. Man came to me and he said, Good, you can't go by that Bible. You have to go by what your pastor, your church says. And at that moment I said, no, I don't accept that. I don't believe that. That everything this book says, I believe and accept. And from this day, if I find something that's different from what's here, I'm going with this. Within about 2 or 3 days, I had this dream. Now, I've had lots of dreams, okay? Lots of dreams, and everybody does. I've had maybe 2 or 3 dreams over the 30 years that I knew were from God, and this was one of them. And I saw myself working in a life-size model of the temple. And I got up in the morning, and I didn't know anything about the temple. I mean, I knew what the normal Christian knew, but it was nothing. And so, but I did know it was from God, and so I directed everything in my life towards studying about the tabernacle, studying about the sacrifices, the ceremonies. I started coming to Israel. I met the various rabbis that were working on the temple. We became friends. I would go and have meetings with them. He opened the door to archaeologists, and not just any archaeologists. These were the key players. So.
What are some of the ones that you've met?
Well, I met a couple days ago. I had Orit Peleg Borkat. She has the latest book published by the Israel Exploration Society, their journal called Keidar, and it's on the royal stoa of the temple. She's been working on it for years. I knew her back when she was working on her master's, working towards getting her doctorate. She's now a professor at Hebrew University. And so she came over to our apartment. I gave her a copy of, I have just put out a book on the temple called Measure the Pattern. I gave her a copy. We're kind of comparing notes. Eilat Mazar, had a meeting with her in January. She is by far, with her grandfather, Benjamin Mazar, they did the excavations, southern steps, southwestern corner, the Ophel. The Ophel is the ridge between the city of David and the Temple Mount. She discovered one of the major discoveries mentioned in the book of Nehemiah. There is a gate from the first temple period called the Water Gate of the Ophel. Next to it is a tower that's called the Projecting Tower. The Projecting Tower was discovered in 1868, not 19, okay? By Captain Charles Warren from the Palestine Exploration Fund. Eilat Mazar comes back And she had told me this story back a few years back about how that they were at the last day. And they were packing up all the gear. And they were finishing their excavation of the Ophel for that season. And she said, I just want to take one more scrape of the shovel. And she found the top of this huge gate that was biblically mentioned. Massive. You can go to the Ophel. You can see there's plaques there. They've reconstructed it. It's tremendous. But it's a major key in the story of the temple. And we have all of these facts out of the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah circled the city, and so he starts at the Temple Mount. He's going to go north from there and west, around by the Tyropian Valley, down to the bottom, where we had the Hino Valley. But when he gets down to the bottom, he's at the Hino Valley, and he's starting to swing back up the Kidron Valley. Now that's very significant because we're talking about coming up from the bottom of the city of David, coming up towards the Temple Mount. He lays everything out in order. He tells about the Shiloh pool. He talks about the King David's tomb and where it was located. He talks about King David's palace. That's really significant. He calls it the lower palace. Then we have, north of that, we have the Ophel. He mentions the water gate, found by Elat Mazor. He mentions the projecting tower, found by Charles Warren. He mentions the wall of the Ophel, found by Benjamin Mazar, Elat Mazar. And then he talks about the Temple Mount. Notice that the Temple Mount is north of this lower palace. Now the lower palace, that's David's palace.
And that's the big question today is what we've found as we've gotten interested in the Temple Mount recently, and you have been for many, many years.
Yes.
Is that lately Ernest Martin's theory from 2000, when he published his book, has seen a big upsurge. So last program we did, we discussed some of our top reasons why that hoax just does not work.
It doesn't work at all.
And,
I was with Elie Shukron about a week ago. Elie Shukron is going to be a key player in Aqueducts, in his book, his videos and everything. And he gives you the impression, if you read the book or you watch the videos, you have to really read carefully to find out that Elie Shukron does not agree with Karduk. He makes it sound like he really believes that he's supporting this, and he's a very important archaeologist. But Elie Shukron says, no, it can't be at the city of David. Elat Mazar told me personally in January that she told Ernest Martin, who she knew, that it won't work. It can't work. There's not enough space there. It doesn't fit the Bible. The Bible says David is going to go up from his palace to the threshing floor.
And now we found the palace, so...
And now they found the palace, and where Ernest Martin and where Karduk placed it, it's right over his palace. It's like, oh, what's the altar doing in my living room? Doesn't work. They found the Accra Fortress in the Gavati parking lot, right across.
When did they find that? That's very recent, isn't it?
Yes, it's very, very recent. Just in the last 3 or 4 years that they discovered it, and they confirmed that it's the Accra. What they found was they found a tower. Okay, so this tower is going to be just the lower walls of it are left, and they found what's called a glacis. Do you know what a glacis is?
Right.
It's going to be a slope.
A fortification like you can see at the Tower of David.
Right, but it's coming up slanted so that an enemy, he can't get ladders, he can't get battering rams. And so they found this, and they found within it coins from the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, and then they found coins from Antiochus VII. Well, Antiochus Epiphanes built it. And Antiochus VII was the ruler of the Seleucids when the brother of Judah Maccabee, Shimon Hasmoneh, when he destroyed the Accra. They found ballista stones. Ballista stones are like little cannonballs. And they had the trident, which is the mark of Antiochus. There's many more proofs.
So let's recap this for people who might be getting lost in the weeds here. So where the alternate Temple Mount hoax theory is putting it in the temple in the city of David.
Yes.
In the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, they've been publishing on this, the
repeatedly
finds that they have made of the Acra fortress
Yes.
in the city of David right there.
Right.
And this is something that before the time of Yeshua, the Antiochus had built it. Is that
Right.
correct?
During the time of the Maccabean revolt.
And then the Maccabees, later generations, the Hasmoneans had destroyed it.
Right.
And this is still
Within
before
about
the time.
20 years of it being built.
They had destroyed it.
Right. They destroyed it.
And so we know this historical fortress, and they have now found the remains of it.
Right.
And it's right where the purported temple site would be.
Right where Queduc and Morton claimed the temple was. But you can't have the temple. The temple, we're told in Scripture, has to stay exactly, precisely at the same location. First temple, second temple, when they build the third temple, has to be at the same location. It's right where Abraham built the altar to bring Isaac to offering as a burnt offering. David later, and this is in Scripture, we're not talking Jewish stories or whatever, this is Scripture. David builds the temple at the same location. In the book of Ezra, when they come back, second temple, they're told, it's in Scripture, you have to build it at its same location. Well, if that was there from the time of King David, 10th century BCE, and we're going to go all the way through the first temple period, we go from the time of Ezra all the way to the time of the Alexander the Great, the Hasmoneans. We're just about 150 years, 170 years before the time of Yeshua, and the Greeks are going to build a fortress. How are they going to build that fortress if there's a temple standing there? It's impossible.
It's impossible. One of the many reasons, so we laid out some reasons the last program, but there are many more. When I watched your presentations, I found a couple of reasons that were just so compelling, that not least one of them. So would you mind talking about one of them that I found so fascinating is let's do the numbers.
Oh, that's a good one.
So if the idea being that one of the arguments for the real Temple Mount, for it actually being the Roman Fort Antonia fortress, is that there needed to fit so many soldiers.
Right.
What are the numbers?
All right. Well, there's some discrepancy about whether there was a cohort or a legion that was stationed there, in the Greek word that's used. But let's not deal with that. Let's say that it's a legion, okay?
The bigger number.
Yes, the bigger number. We know that there were legions brought into the Antonia at the time of the festival. So it obviously could house a legion 6,000 men. Now, they're going to swell the numbers up to like 12,000, 14,000, because they say, well, they've got all the vendors that are supplying the fortress. They have, all of the eating establishments and so forth. If you look at Roman, there are a number of books on the Romans. I recommend some by Peter Conley. They tell you the Romans didn't let the vendors inside because they didn't trust anybody.
That's a security risk.
It's a security risk. So we have 6,000 soldiers. Okay. Now they say that the 6,000 soldiers are going to need the entire Temple Mount, and that's 35 acres. So that proves there's not enough room in the little area that's put up at the very top by some of the scholars, and they're good scholars, where the Antonia was. That's Antonia Hill. Okay. Some of the scholars say that this area at the very northwestern corner of the Temple Mount is the entire Antonia. Understand that many other scholars, top scholars, like Ehud Netzer, he was the leading authority on Herodian structures. He's the one that found King Herod's tomb at Herodian. Ori Pelek Barkat, who I mentioned the other day, just Jewish book, Ilat Mazar. The Conrad Schick from the Palestine Exploration Fund. They all place the Antonia coming down into the Temple Mount all the way to what is called the fosse, right here. It's a dry ditch. This is the old bars. Now that would easily house 6,000 people, and it would also meet the descriptions that Josephus gave in his works. Now, that would leave this area south of this as the Temple Mount. Now, the problem with the city of David is its entire area is only 14 acres.
It's less than half.
Let me ask you a question. How big is a cubit?
It's roughly half a meter, not quite.
Okay, half a meter, and so in inches, people say 18 inches. People frequently say from the elbow to the fingertip, okay? My question is, whose arm? What we know at this point is there were 3 different cubits that were used on the Temple Mount. The smallest one was 19.2 inches.
So let's take that.
Yes, let's take that one.
The smallest.
The smallest. Smallest one is 19.2 inches. If we were to place the temple down at the city of David, we only have across the top of the ridge. We're only going to have, you know what our cubit would be?
How much?
Less than 6 inches. Less than 6 inches. And that's not a cubit. Nowhere in the world is a cubit described as being less than 14 inches. So first off, numerically, it won't work. Secondly, how many people do you have come to the temple? We have 6,000 Roman soldiers up there. According to Josephus, during the festivals, during Passover, they had more than 2 million people. Everybody has to go to the temple. How many were in the temple on a daily basis? Well, according to the letter of Aristeas, there were more than 1,000 priests on a daily basis. We're not counting the Levites. We're not counting all the worshipers. And so our numbers of everybody being in the temple are going to be much more in demand for the temple than the fortress of Antonia. So it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. So Josephus records 2,700,200 pilgrims
Yes.
at the time of a Passover festival.
That's right.
So maybe not all of them are in the temple, maybe not all at the same time, but the number is still so many.
It will not work.
More times than the 6,000.
And then you see, he has to have outer courtyards, inner courtyards, temple building. His temple building, my goodness, it's the size of a grocery store. Okay? I mean, it's ridiculous. It will not work. And people, you know, if you come over here and look, it's obvious it will not work.
So there are divided opinions. Some great scholars say the Antonia fortress was smaller.
Yes.
And that when the garrison would swell, they would have some structures outside the fort proper and build it up that way during the festivals. Other respected scholars have the Antonia fortress larger,
yes,
heading into the real Temple Mount.
Right.
Either way, the question is, who needs more space?
That's
Roman
right.
garrison of 6,000 men, let's say,
right,
with millions of pilgrims.
That's right.
To the temple. And
that's
if
right.
you believe the Martin Cornick conspiracy, you've got the temple in the city of David being much smaller than the 35-acre Temple Mount.
That's right. And you've got it built over structures that are already there. Can't work.
So I have another question for you. Because you are mentioning now the cubits.
Yes.
And you're saying, let's even take the smallest cubit to try to squeeze the temple into the city of David.
Right. We have to do a lot of squeezing.
It doesn't work, obviously. But then becomes the argument between the Mishnah and Josephus.
Yes.
What about a 600-foot stadia measurement for the temple? What are the measurements for the temple in Josephus, and what is it referring to? And is Cornick excluding the Mishnah 500 cubit then?
Well, first off, if you read Cornick's book, there is not one reference to the Mishnah. Okay, his only reference is Josephus, and Josephus is a tremendous asset. He was a priest. We don't know if he served in the temple as a priest, but he was a priest from a priestly family, and he was a contemporary. He was an eyewitness of the temple, so his accounts are tremendous. The Mishnah is going to be the collection, bottom line of what the Mishnah is it is going to be the decisions of the Sanhedrin that are recorded on various topics. And it's going to be divided into 6 areas. And every one of these areas, one is going to be called agriculture. Okay, so it's going to deal with subjects such as tithing. Where'd you pay your tithes? At the temple. Second tithe. Where'd you pay that? Temple. The Torah, these are free will offerings that are given at the festival of Shavuot directly to the priest. So then your next order is going to be Moed, and it's dealing with Passover. Where does that take place? temple, Sukkot, ceremonies there. I mean, the whole Mishnah is going to really teach us about the temple. One section is called Kodashim, holy things, and we have a book of measurements called Midot. Okay, so Midot tells us that there was 500 cubits to the Temple Mount, and then it gives us the measurements for all of your various courtyards. Now, my experience with Josephus is that many times it seems to have controversies between a figure that Josephus gives and a figure that the Mishnah or the Tanakh gives. In reality, if we work at it long enough, I'm not talking about manipulate it. Josephus will be speaking from a certain perspective, and the Mishnah, they're coming from another perspective. But our experience so far has been that eventually they will not contradict, but they will dovetail together to say exactly the same thing. Now, earlier I mentioned Josephus is going to record about a stadia. You mentioned this. We get the word stadium from that Roman word, from that Latin word. The Orit Peleg, in her book, or Orit Peleg Barkat, on her book on the Royal Stoa, Josephus described the Royal Stoa in one of his accounts as being a stadia in length. In another, he's going to describe it as bigger than a stadia, which are correct. Both are. He is coming from a certain perspective when he says a stadia. He's only presenting a certain part of it. The Royal Stoa, precise. The Royal Stoa extended with the towers on the end, two different measurements. So here's the first thing that you have to do whenever you look, and Josephus gives a measurement and it's not matching with other measurements, is that it's not that he's wrong, it's not that the other figure's wrong, it's that you have to figure out the perspective they're presenting from. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand completely. So in the Mishnah, for example, they might be dealing with what's legally the holy space.
That's correct.
Josephus might be looking at the eyewitness account of what he's looking at.
Right. And he can be giving a measurement that seems to be a total contradiction, but in reality, it's not. Here's a problem. Christians are going to be coming from Christian backgrounds, and whereas Jews are coming from a different background. And we often, even Jews from today, are coming from a background of current Israel, current Judaism. Whereas we're looking at a period for the temple and it being destroyed 2,000 years ago. And we have to go back and place ourselves into that time frame. And place, not only in that time frame, but how were things viewed in this country? How were things viewed in Jerusalem? And that makes a lot of difference as we go in. One thing that we've learned is, in the 30 years I've been working in this, is everything we knew originally about the temple, pretty much we had to change. But that's exciting because you're seeing what you weren't seeing before. You have a better view of what's happening there. My work, there's many, many people working on the temple. My work and what I try to show people is the temple, you have to understand how it functioned. So understanding how the water system worked, understanding how they got all these animals in there, how they performed on. Why doesn't anybody complain about the sound of the cows, okay, or the stench of the stockyard? We don't.
Why?
Well, I mean, these are the questions. These are things that we answer. How are we going to rebuild all these buildings? Not one building is standing on top, but we have to build them according to the plan that God gave. So that's our quest, is to go in and discover that and find that.
I found one of the challenges that you place for Christians, because like you said, you know, if Martin had come with you read everything on the temple, and so you picked up Martin's book when it came out and started reading it right away, but you saw that it was off pretty much right away. But if he had come with something that was valid, why not? We
Yes.
want to find the truth.
Absolutely.
But they make a lot of this, the verses about one stone on top of another. So we have 3 references to this in the Gospels.
Right.
2 of them are parallel with
The Temple Mount.
Jesus is on the Temple Mount
Yes.
with his followers, and he's pointing, they're looking at the actual buildings.
Right. Yes. So they make this big deal of, well, the retaining walls, the walls that are around, that disproves Yeshua. Okay? He's going to make another statement in Luke. And in Luke, if you want to...
Luke 19, yeah.
Yes.
Let's read that. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it. Very important.
Yes, he's coming from the Mount of Olives.
He's coming from the Mount of Olives, looking over the city. He wept over it, saying, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you do not know the time of your visitation."
Right.
So this one is...
That's for the whole city of Jerusalem.
That's for the whole city.
Yes.
And a lot of people, first of all, to say, have taken this in a very triumphant way, that he's triumphant about the city is going to be prophesying, but he's weeping here that it's going to be destroyed. He's
Right.
the weeping prophet Jeremiah.
Right.
But let's get technical with this here about one stone on top of another in all of Jerusalem.
Right. Okay. Not far from here is the old city. And it's full of excavations. We could go down to the city of David. It's full of excavations. We could go all over Jerusalem. They're excavating. And in the city of David, for instance, we have what's called the Herodian mansions. And they found a mansion, and in fact, Lee Bridmeyer, and I would agree with him, believes that this was the house of Ananias, the high priest.
Wow.
Okay? And that means that Yeshua would have had one of his trials there. When they came in and they excavated this house, this is following the 1967 Six-Day War. The Jordanians had blown up the Jewish quarter. They made a decision to come in before building anything, clear away the rubble, and see what was underneath. And so there it was, the ruins from when Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 Common Era. And they found these 5 houses. And these were all homes of priests. Now, the palatial mansion was the biggest. I think it's something like 4,000 feet, 6,000 feet. And it had walls that were standing 3 stories high.
So these are walls from the time of Yeshua, that he may have even been in this house.
Yes, he might have had a trial right there in that house.
But those stones are still on top of each other.
Yes, and you can go see them today. It's a museum, and they have a building built over it. And not only that house, you have next to it the peristyle house, and we have columns. Now, the columns, some of the columns are going to be standing all the way to the top, and they're drums. So how they build these is there's a drum here, and then it's round, it's about so high, and then they place another drum on top of it, and then another drum on top of that. So basically you have stone with a stone on top and a stone on top, and they have this whole row of these. Okay, I can take you to the third wall. This was built by King Agrippa II. It was built after Yeshua was crucified and resurrected,
But before
the destruction of the temple. And Josephus is going to tell all about the Romans breaking through the third wall. And there's many places that it will stand higher than my head.
So what's the solution?
Well, the solution is that Yeshua, when he spoke that not one stone will stand upon another stone. We could even look in Josephus, and Titus says you can't even tell that there was a city there, that it's destroyed to its foundations. If you look in the literature of the time, if you look in Jewish writings, you look in Latin, Roman writings, Greek writings, this is the way that people express themselves. It is a way that they're saying it's going to be destroyed. It is going to be a total destruction. And we might say about Hiroshima, in World War II. We dropped the atomic bomb. And we could say it was leveled. It was leveled. But the reality is there were structures that were still standing. And so our expression wasn't meant to be taken exactly.
It's intentional hyperbole, in other words.
That's right. That's right. In the Mishnah, it talks about the sounds of the temple. And it says that they could hear the sound of the great gate. That's the gate that where they're opening the temple building, all the way in Jericho. That's 15 miles away. It says that they could hear the sound of the flute. Now, the flute is only going to be played in the temple one day of the year. Well, that's during Sukkot. Okay? And it's going to be played when they're bringing the water up for the water libation. The whole temple, they blow the silver trumpets, the whole place goes silent so that they can hear the sound of the flute. But unless you're just really close, in reality, you're not going to be able to hear it. But they say you could hear it in Jericho. Okay? It's a way of, we use neon lights, we use big signs, we have all types of way that we bring attention to a statement. This was the ancient method. You have to understand, Yeshua, we're not saying Yeshua is rogue. We're saying that we're taking it rogue. And so the walls, retaining walls. Can we talk about that?
Absolutely.
All right. So what is a retaining wall? A retaining wall is going to be a wall that they build. They're going to fill in behind it, but they're building a wall to make a level area on top that they can build a structure on.
Like the walls of a sandbox.
Yes, like the walls, a great illustration. So back in about 1962, somewhere around there, a British archaeologist named Kathleen Kenyon starts working in the Kidron Valley, in the northern part of it, right below the Ophel, and she discovers part of what she calls the stepstone structure. Okay? So she doesn't know what it's for, but she knows it's important. And so 1975, after the Six-Day War, they sent an archaeological team in under Professor Igal Shiloh. And so he excavates, this was what they called his Area G in archaeology. You just say Area G and people know what you're talking about. Anyway, he reveals the entire stepstone structure. Now, I'm going to give you a bonus here. He found a glacis from the Hasmonean period right over it. And that glacis, they kept soil samples, and they found it matched the glacis they found at the Accra. So they found the Accra on one side and the Accra on the other side.
So the stepstone structure, which everyone sees today when
yes.
the city of David, was
right.
actually underneath a Hasmonean glacis.
Right.
Is that correct?
In other words, they built that stepstone structure earlier. Later on, they're going to build over it. Okay? So they don't know what the stepstone structure's for. They know it's important, and they know it's a retaining wall for something that was big up at the top. Dr. Eilat Mazar comes along. She takes her Tanakh, takes her Bible, and she reads, and she says, okay, David conquers the city, the Jebusite city, and we know where that is, and he's going to build his palace adjoining it north of it. So basically, and I love how, the cartoons where they go out and they draw an X on the ground, like here's the treasure, okay? She basically does that. She draws an X on the ground and says, David's palace should be right here. So anyway, back in the States and worldwide, there were organizations that they read her articles on this, and they raised the money, bought the area. She goes in, what does she find? She finds this giant palace. It's a royal structure. It is from the time of King David, and she comes out with an article, Did I Find King David's Palace? And pretty much it is accepted that that's what she found. And now we know what the retaining wall was for. It was for David's palace at the top of the city of David, that if we didn't have that retaining wall, first big rain, earthquake, whatever, here comes the palace, straight down the hill. And so the retaining wall, here's the important part, nobody calls that stepstone structure David's palace. is the retaining wall for David's palace. We don't call the retaining walls around the Temple Mount the temple. The temple's on top. Retaining walls are what's there to hold that together so you can have the temple on top.
The Western Wall, in that sense, wasn't even sacred
No.
to the 500 cubit square that Jewish people would legally consider to be the sacred
Right.
Holy Mountain's top.
That's it. It was on the other side of the wall. It's on the other side of the wall, not that's the retaining wall. And there's going to come a day that, that changes. The Kotel is not going to be the place to go on the Temple Mount will be.
So what we see today surrounding the Temple Mount,
Yes.
those were retaining walls.
Yes.
That are not actually, they're just surrounding the Temple Mount. They're not actually the sacred area.
They're not sacred area, okay? They are the outer walls. Now, let me give you something that a lot of people don't realize. And this has actually been used in part of the various conspiracies to show that the Temple Mount is not the right place. Eli Shukron, he, along with Dr. Ronnie Reich from Haifa University, great archaeologists, they excavated the foundations at the southwestern corner. They did a lot of the work on the street level and then below the street level. They found, I'm going to tell about 2 discoveries. And there's a conference, by the way, yearly in the city of David that is held in about August on all the discoveries that are made. They print journals. People can read this stuff for themselves. Eli Shukron, everybody believed that the western wall, where we have our kotel, okay, where the prayer area is, that was there at the time of Yeshua. And it's possible it was. But it certainly wasn't there at the time of Herod. In other words, Herod died, we call it Herod's Wall. He died before they built the Western Wall. Now, how did they know that? Because
they found something underneath.
Yes, they found something. What they did, and this is going to be close to the southwestern corner, they found that they had to dig a foundation trench. Now, a foundation trench is very, for the Herodian Temple Mount, was very shallow. It was only maybe 6 inches, whereas the ones that are described by Josephus for the first temple, built by Solomon, were very, very deep. They have found it down at the city of David, just a side point. So anyway, when they built they dug the foundation trenches, and they're going to place the first row of stones. Then they're going to come back, and they're going to put like a cement that will be there at the foundation stones. They had to build over where some houses were from the first temple period, from earlier periods. There were 2 or 3 mikvaot, immersion baths, that were from the time of the Hasmoneans. So they came in and they filled this up with cement. So in order to investigate it, Eli Shukron and Ronnie Reich, they're going to come in and they're going to break that cement and look down inside. And they found inside a jar. And inside the jar, it was a lamp, basically a lamp. And inside that lamp, they found coins. And they found 2 sets of these. So one is going to be from about 10 years after Herod died. And the second is from about 20 years after Herod died.
So basically they have found coins dated 20 years after King Herod's death.
Yes.
Underneath the foundation of what is today the Western Wall.
Right. So that wall during the time of Yeshua was under construction. We're not sure that it was built in its entirety. Right. But we don't know. So certainly, did the people of Yeshua's time consider that wall to be the temple? No. They considered what was on top to be the temple. And so, that's something that is tremendously important to have I bring people over here. I take them to the Temple Mount, and I try to take them around and show them where the various things that we can still see from the temple. What is what, where it was, and give them a vision for how it looked. Why is it important? Well, it's the throne of God on earth. It's the place that we're in Scripture instructed to face towards. How bad would it be if the Temple Mount is up here and you're believing this thing that cannot be established by any credibility at all, the city of David? Here you are, you're facing down there where the throne wasn't, and you're ignoring where the throne was. You need to know where the temple is located. And why King Solomon said, face towards it. Face towards it. You're addressing your king. And so we want people to be able to see the temple. We want them to understand how it functioned. We're called the living temple of God. Well, people say, I don't need the temple because I'm the temple of God. Well, if I ask you 5 basic questions on the temple, could you answer them? I'm not talking directly to you, but if I'm asking you different fundamental questions on the temple, could you answer them?
I find this is like sometimes, it says in one of John's letters that how can you love God who you can't see if you can't love your brother whom you can see?
Right.
So I wonder if people can really love the unseen temple of God's people if they can't love the literal thing. It's like they pit these things against each other. Do you think there's anything in particular with this theory, with this Cornuke theory, that's particularly destructive for?
Absolutely. I think that first off, the bottom line is it's anti-Semitic. It's saying, no, the Jews are wrong. We're right. I hate to bring this up, but I understand he was a really nice guy. I didn't know him, Ernest Morton, but in his own book, he says in his introduction, he studied 6 months before he put the book together. Okay? You cannot master this in 6 months. You can learn a lot, but you can't. And he was ignoring what was being told to him by the experts, by Elat Bazar, Dr. Benjamin Bazar, others. It is saying the Jews are wrong. We know right. We know better. Regrettably, within Christianity, there is a lot of anti-Semitism. There is a lot of you Jews, you don't know anything. We have all the answers. The reality is that God set up the Jewish people to preserve the Scripture. They preserved the understandings. They preserved how the Passover was done. It is still done. And everything he gave to them, they're called the chosen people. And our role as believers is to stand with them, not to say, you're wrong. And you can go and for yourself, and you can check out what's the excavations that are going on here in the city of David. You can find out from the Biblical Archaeological Society, from the Israel Exploration Society, who are the credible archaeologists. Find out what they're saying. Read good materials on the temple. I'd recommend Alfred Edersheim's book. It's a classic from the 1800s. He was a believer in Yeshua, but tremendous book. Dan Bahat, Elat Bazar. I've got 2 books. I have a book called Measure the Pattern on the Function of the Temple. I have another one called Discover the Locations on the Floor Plan of the Temple.
Another big point that's made a lot is about the water for the temple.
Yes.
I'd like to get your take on that as well, because people say, well, the Gihon spring is the only water source, and there's so much blood from these sacrifices. What are we going to do?
Well, the temple did not use the water from the Gihon spring. The Gihon spring is down at the city of David. The Temple Mount has massive cisterns that are on it. These were charted starting in 1865 and coming up into the 1870s by an organization out of London called the Palestine Exploration Fund. Captain Charles Wilson. We have a gate named after him called Wilson's Arch. Captain Charles Warren. We have a gate named after him. There's also Warren Shaft. There's Warren's places all over the city. We have Lieutenant Claude Condor, and then we have a German-Swiss architect named Comrade Schick. These were our main explorers. They came and they were allowed on the Temple Mount to do a survey of the water sources. A very wealthy lady in England had offered to give the Turks a brand new water system for the city based upon the condition that they could survey it, the existing water system. So they send these royal engineers along with Comrade Schick, and they go on the Temple Mount. They find some of the cisterns hold over 200 million gallons of water. There are massive collection systems for collecting rainwater. There is an aqueduct, and I went there just in January to 3 huge pools. Now, when I say huge pools, picture the size of an ocean tanker, okay? One of these big, huge, gigantic ocean tankers. These 3 pools are going to be about comparable to that. And they're full of water, and they have this aqueduct system that was built before Herod by the Hasmoneans. Herod is going to improve it and bring more, but they bring the water into the temple over the Wilson's Arch Bridge, and it goes into the cisterns. There's a full operating system. We have complete charts of all of these, even the conduit system. I've had the opportunity to go down into some of the underground structures. The temple does not need the water from the Gihon Spring. The temple did not want the water from the Gihon Spring, because the temple is going to be called twice in the Mishnah and once in the Tanakh. It will be called Birah, which means fortress. And it was the strongest fortification within the city. The temple was the palace of the king. When I say the king, I mean literally Hashem himself. But it was a fortress too. And that's why the Romans burned it. That's why it got burned in the end. When you have a fortress, you want to have your own independent water supply. Now, the Antonia, it didn't have the same water, so it didn't use the water from the Gihon Spring. It didn't use the water that they were using on the Temple Mount. It had its own cisterns, and it brought water from up by the Damascus Gate, and they built channels coming down to it. And so there are extensive reports on the ancient water systems, and the people that are saying, they don't understand Jerusalem, they don't understand the archaeology of the city, and they're going after fables that sound good to people, but they're not based on fact at all.
So in our program, we're talking about the water source that came into the city. We were talking about the valley, the Tyropian Valley. We're talking about all these different periods in history. And today we're going to go look at that and see how did this develop through time. You have to actually start in Bethlehem. Up here in Bethlehem, just south of us, you will have the source of the water that will come all the way down through this aqueduct system right here. This was a 21-kilometer long aqueduct system that fed water from Bethlehem, which is actually 11 kilometers away from us, into the Temple Mount. To follow the Jewish custom of having living water to serve God, you had to have a natural source of water flowing all the way into the mikvaot, all the way into the washing and the cleansing of all the animal sacrifices, etc. And the way they managed this amazing, clever way of serving God up on the Temple Mount was through this aqueduct system. And on top of that, it was still in function up until 1967.
Wow, you really see the layers here.
Yeah,
You're looking down at something from the Hasmonean period, Doron. And this isn't just an assumption, this is dated.
So Hasmonean is how far back to our
2,200 years ago.
Right.
Okay? So here we have an aqueduct coming in, and then we have what is called a settling pool. This area right here was built because when aqueducts flow, sometimes they carry along debris, and you would like the debris to settle out of your water, especially if you're going to be drinking it.
Right.
So the debris would settle down into this pool, and then the water would carry on into these two channels. Now, why are there two, where only one came in? It's because they fork and they go in slightly different directions to other mikvahs. Right behind this wall, there is another mikvah. There are mikvahs that you can see in the chain of generations. And maybe you want to go over there.
All right, so this is kind of like the Indiana Jones tour, guys. We're going below the lower of the lower of the lowest levels. And right here, this is about as low as you can get to view the mikvahot that go underground here, under the Western Wall tunnels. We're actually under those tunnels. So the tunnels are actually just behind me over here. And here we're going even below, we're going below the ground level of the typical tours that people go on to show you and expose to you this mikveh. Why is this so significant? Because it proves that that water was brought in for a purpose. The purpose was to fill this mikveh and all the many other mikvaot that filled out the whole valley here. This being, actually, we're standing now in the Tyropian Valley that we talked about in our program. So we're in the Tyropian Valley. This is the mikveh that was being used during the Second Temple period, the Hasmonean period, etc. This is awesome. This is very important evidence. It debunks this idea that there was only water in the Gihon. And we also know that up on the Temple Mount, that water from the aqueduct would pour through and actually basically flush out the blood and all the sacrificial stuff down into the Kidron Valley. That's what all the archaeology is pointing to. So you have to follow the evidence, not follow what my theory is. So we've spoken to the experts, we went to them, we went to the very foundations, we've gotten special permissions to film where nobody else gets to film and go. Because we live here, we work with the experts, we have a working relationship with them, and we're able to give you this special access to these locations to unveil the history of the old city.
Comes Pontius Pilate and builds a second one. If one's good, two's better. He builds his a bit higher. Okay. Some say that might have come from the time of Herod because his palace was a bit higher than the Temple Mount. Right. And Herod had to have fountains. Herod had to have elegance.
Sure.
So water coming into Jerusalem, city of David, forget it. That's small stuff. Let's give credit where credit is due. Charles Warren. Right. Charles Warren actually began serious archaeology in this area. Now when I say this area, I mean right here, because there were many others digging outside, but Charles Warren was attracted to this area. He began digging shafts and tunnels. He wanted to dig on the Temple Mount, but he wasn't allowed. Right. So he surveyed, and he surveyed all those cisterns. And the one you're talking about is called the Great Sea.
The Great Sea.
Yeah. And it's supported by pillars of...
And why is it called the Great Sea?
Well,
it's massive.
You have to see his drawings. Unbelievable. Yeah. If we could bring in water in a kosher manner, and what I mean by kosher is, you cannot pick up buckets of water and dump them in the mikveh.
So it doesn't count to take living water and transport it. Yeah.
You just ruined it. It's now dead. You know, you could go to that Japanese guy that looks at those molecules of water. You've got happy water and you've got sad water. Have you ever gone into that?
No, I haven't.
Oh, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. But obviously there are changes you can make in water. And he's proved it. Okay, so that's another whole field. But this water has to have gotten here by itself. Now, you can easily say, well, yes, it is getting here by itself. Do you see the hole right there? Water's pouring out. But where is that water coming from? Which gets us back to our aqueduct. That means that the water in the aqueduct had to run constantly from the source, 11 kilometers south of here. It had to move along without stopping, no 90-degree bends, smooth, 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 until it ends up here. How's it going to get here? From the aqueduct on the bridge above our heads.
So to debunk the theory that the only water source for the service at the temple in the city of David, not up on the Temple Mount as we know today, the best way we can debunk this theory, the most simplest way we can debunk it, is actually through Jewish halakha.
Exactly.
So here we are in the busy part of the city where all the tourists are walking by every day and they don't even realize what's over here behind me. These are the southern steps of the Temple Mount that led up to the temple when Jews were bathing in these ritual baptismal pools here, as we were looking at earlier, underneath the old city of today. So just here behind me is where they would continue to feed those mikvaot with the clever way in order to get water to these baptismal pools so that you could ritually get purified so you could serve up at the temple. There is actually a few options. You either bathe in these baptismal pools, or you would bathe in the Shiluach pool just below the city of David, and the very bottom of the city of David actually would be this huge pool of water that people would ritually bathe in. And then today we found the steps that actually lead up all the way up to the Temple Mount in a special way where it was actually divided. So there were those that were going up and there were those that were coming down, in order to prevent those who are purified now to access the temple and not come in contact with anything that would make them impure all over again, and then they have to go back down the mountain again.
What would you say a message for believers, for people around the world that you are passionate about, that you want people to know about the Temple Mount?
Well, I believe that the very first command, when Moses went on the mountain, that he was given to build the temple. It's in chapter 25, verse 8 of Exodus. Now, we go all the way from that point, and it's going to have about the Sabbath in there, but it's in relationship to the temple. We'll go from that point, chapter 25, all the way through 15 chapters of the book of Exodus, and we'll go 10 chapters through the book of Leviticus before we get to a command that is not directly related to the temple. We have 613 commandments in the Torah. 271 of those are directly about the temple. So God gave all of these commandments about the temple at first. Later on in Ezekiel, he tells the people to study the temple, to write it down, to learn every entrance, every exit, every ceremony, every law. And then he says that it will turn you from sin in your life. I believe that if you study the temple, it's the key to understanding the Bible. I believe that it will open up the Torah, the Tanakh, the Gospels, the epistles. You will see Messiah in ways you never saw before. You will, in your personal life, you will grow. You will see things that you didn't even know were important. And that's what the Holy Temple is about. It's called the House of Holiness, Beit HaMikdash, or House of Kedusha.
Well, the reverse must be true then also, that if you don't know the temple, you will understand less of the scriptures and less of the prophets and the writings, the Torah and the Gospels. And I think it's so tragic that we are, but there are also rays of light and hope that we have a choice of either writing another chapter on Luther's book about the Jews and their lies, or with going with the structure that God has set up and listen to the fathers in the faith. We look forward to tackling that issue right on this show.
I wish you ultimate success.
Joseph Good, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure.
It was mine. Thank you.